If Rishi Sunak failed to consult the leader of the opposition before ordering fresh airstrikes, new airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, I think we've got a fairly big problem. Rishi Sunak, I would remind you, was voted for by precisely nobody. The only people that have voted for Rishi Sunak are the people that voted for him to become the MP for Richmond in Yorkshire. And that has, some relevance, surely, on democratic mandates more broadly speaking, but possibly a bit of a distraction to go in on that. Crucially, this is a decision taken by a nation, not a government, effectively. If you're not going to put it before Parliament, then the only rationale for that is that you know that you've got the support of the opposition. So there's no point putting it before Parliament, or at least there is no need to put it before Parliament, because the result of any vote is a foregone conclusion. It does away with debate. And although some contributors to debates like that can be a bit self-indulgent, it also offers an opportunity for the public, for the body politic, to learn a bit more about what some of the issues are and what some of the consequences may be. I don't understand, and I'm going to ask you this question and others, I don't understand why the UK is involved at all. I mean, why is it the UK standing or flying alongside the US? But more importantly, the decision by Rishi Sunak to do this, to conduct airstrikes in the Middle East, without any, so far as we can tell, without any consultation of the leader of the opposition, seems to me to be stunning. So they're off. The attacks are underway. It's shipping in the Red Sea that they're worried about. Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, which they say is designed to both disrupt and retaliate against support for Israel in that area. So the Houthi rebels, who are a pretty bloodthirsty bunch, but I'm afraid that's a word that can be applied with a degree of indiscriminate accuracy in the context of conflict. They're a pretty bloodthirsty bunch, and they say that they are doing this, and that UK and US, and this perhaps is an answer to my first question, UK and US vessels are coming under particular attack because of their very public, vocal and prominent support for the continuing actions of Israel in Gaza, where the death toll has now soared past 25,000, although we must also add that 21 Israeli troops have also died in Gaza in the last few hours while rigging up explosives in a building where obviously the explosives were designed to blow up other people, not them, but they have lost their lives as well. The two countries, the US and the UK, have said that they are trying to protect the free flow of commerce. A joint statement that came from the Pentagon said that an additional round of proportionate and necessary strikes against the Houthis has been undertaken. It's the 8th strike, but it's the second time the UK have joined in. The first time, of course, was the 11th of January. The newish Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, and you have to, well, you don't have to, but he was made a lord, of course, despite many question marks still hanging over his involvement in the Greensill company, which I think has now gone under, and various, and of course his personal responsibility for an awful lot of the problems that the country is facing as a consequence both of his cowardice in the face of the threat of Faragists and his loose support for the disgusting ideological horrors of austerity. But he's Foreign Secretary now, because in this country you get rewarded for failure if you're far enough to the right wing or you know the right people. He describes it as a clear message that will continue to degrade the Houthis' ability to carry out attacks. I have a horrible feeling that Rishi Sunak is doing this because there's an election this year and he thinks that voters quite like the look of someone who gets stuck in to Middle Eastern conflicts, even against the backdrop of relatively disastrous involvement in the Second Gulf War and elsewhere, failure to get properly involved perhaps in Syria. I don't know why he's doing it, and I'm about to ask you. But I do know that if the Shadow Health Minister, talking to Nick earlier, was correct, and oddly, we find ourselves in a position where the Conservatives say that Labour was informed, but not in a position where Labour agree, or the most senior Labour politician to speak so far doesn't agree. I think, and listen, you know as well as I do by now that my radar on these issues is far from infallible. My antennae sometimes twitch at the wrong times, and sometimes they don't twitch at all at the right times. And I don't like using phrases like big deal in the context of conversations like this because they sound a little childish. But I think this is a very big deal. I don't think that the United Kingdom should be getting involved in airstrikes anywhere on an autonomous decision taken by a Prime Minister. So, and I also found, while we're on the subject, I found the argument from David Cameron last time on January the 11th that this has nothing to do with the wider conflict in Israel and Gaza almost unbelievably disingenuous, given that the people that they were bombing insisted that the actions they'd taken that they were now being bombed for were done in support of the Palestinian people and in retaliation to the American and UK support for Israel. And that is a very lonely place internationally now, that support for Israel. Ehud Barak, a former Prime Minister of Israel, Israel's most decorated soldier. I mention that because even the biggest qualifier this morning for Idiot's Corner is going to struggle to describe Ehud Barak as anti-Semitic. He's warned that Israel will find itself sinking in the Gaza mud for years to come if Benjamin Netanyahu retains his fragile grip on power. So the criticism of Israel, the criticism of Netanyahu comes from all corners now, including yesterday families of hostages who stormed the Knesset. And yet the claim from David Cameron that the decision to bomb Houthi rebels has nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza is extraordinary. All right, I've now got a little further information for you, a little breaking news. A Labour source has just told LBC that they expected to be briefed and that Sir Keir Starmer was not informed ahead of time. So clarification for you, breaking news for you. At the time of the 10 o'clock news bulletin, the Conservatives were saying that Labour had been informed. We were relying, and there was no reason to doubt her word, because she was doing the rounds this morning, as they say, which means she would have been fully briefed and informed by the Shadow Health Minister that Labour had not been informed. But we're now fairly confident that Sir Keir Starmer was not informed ahead of time that Rishi Sunak had independently and autonomously decided to drop bombs in the Middle East. Because that's always worked out really well in the recent past. The Prime Minister doesn't care. Not only does he not care about what you think about this, he doesn't care what the Leader of the Opposition thinks about this. He doesn't care about the most basic requirements of parliamentary democracy, particularly in the context of killing foreigners. You don't do it under convention and tradition without support. And if you're not sure that you would get parliamentary support, you have a vote. If you are sure that you'll get parliamentary support, you can be in that position only and exclusively because the Leader of the Opposition has assured you of his or her support. So I do increasingly think that we're in very strange waters here. And I do understand some of it, and I don't understand other bits of it, which is where you come in. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. Question number one. Do you buy for a nanosecond the Conservative government's insistence that this has nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza and is instead entirely about keeping trade routes open? I mean, just think for a moment about timing. 0345 6060 973. Question number two, and sometimes when we're dealing with hefty issues of constitutional import, it's a little bit hard for me to convey to you the sense of urgency that I feel, because it feels as if we're sort of icebergs floating slowly in the sea. It's all a bit big. It's a bit above my pay grade, James. It's all a bit important, this. I certainly don't on this programme invite in sort of lazy, knee-jerk, ill-informed responses to issues of note. But equally, I quite like the subjects about which it's not too hard to arrive at a strong opinion. But this one, and PMQ's, of course, coming up tomorrow, this one seems to me to be quite significant. What is Rishi Sunak playing at when he sides with America in bombing Houthi positions in the Middle East, which may or may not be the right thing to do? It's impossible to say with certainty at this point in proceedings. But what is he playing at if, as we believe, he hasn't even briefed, let alone consulted, the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer? So this is the bit that perhaps is most interesting. I mean, I am doing a bit of a Marvin Gaye this morning. I am interested in what you think is going on, because you have Houthis who are backed by Iran, who've been targeting ships that they say are linked to Israel and the West, which means that although they've been active in that area for years, the ships that they're targeting latterly are ships that they say are linked to Israel and the West. So we are now retaliating because that includes our ships. Prior to now, our ships were not particularly in the firing line, probably because they're better armed than you pick off the weakest one at the back of the pack, don't you, if it's piracy? But if it's political or military, then you pick off, you focus on the strongest. You have to. So they're going after British and American ships, particularly American ships, in the Red Sea. They say they're doing it because of links to Israel. And, the death toll, as I say, has passed 25,000 now, although you'll struggle to find that figure in any British newspapers today. Incredibly, that's a conversation we can have on another occasion. They've taken out an arms silo and other sites, but they haven't asked the leader of the opposition or informed the leader of the opposition in advance. So I want you to tell me, number one, whether you, and I want some people to believe it. I want you to explain to me why you think it's fair to claim, for the British government to claim that this has got nothing to do with the things that the people they're bombing say it's all about. That just seems to me, at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, to be at best disingenuous and at worst downright deceitful. But I could be wrong.